Good morning, my dears. I'm Clara Thompson, 87 years old, and today I'm going to share the darkest story of my life. A story I've kept hidden for decades, but one that needs to be told so other women don't experience what I went through. Before I begin, if you're enjoying this video, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this grandma continue sharing her stories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening to my stories. It all began in 1958. I was only 20 years old when I met Anthony at our small town's harvest festival in rural Nebraska. He was handsome, hardworking, sold farming equipment, and had a smile that lit up my heart. We fell in love quickly, as people did back then. We didn't have time for long courtships like today. Within 3 months, we were married. What I didn't know was that by marrying Anthony, I was entering not just a marriage, but a prison controlled by Mrs. Genevieve, my mother-in-law, a woman who, behind her Bible and Sunday church attendance, hid a soul capable of the worst cruelties. I remember as if it were yesterday the first time I stepped into that house. It was a beautiful rural property, with an apple orchard in the back and a vegetable garden that Mrs. Genevieve tended meticulously. "This house has belonged to our family for 3 generations, she told me, while showing me the bedroom I would share with Anthony. I hope you know how to appreciate the privilege of being part of it now." I didn't realize at the time, but those words contained a warning. I was an intruder there, someone who constantly needed to prove her worth. During those first months, I tried everything to please my mother-in-law. I woke up before sunrise to prepare breakfast. I kept the house spotless. I helped in the garden even after a full day of washing and ironing clothes, but nothing was ever enough. If I baked a cake, her mother's was better. If I cleaned the house, there was always a corner I had neglected. If I wore a pretty dress to please Anthony, it was too flashy for a family woman. "You have city girl hands," she would say, looking with contempt at my broken nails from all the work. "They're not suited for country life." The truth is, I wasn't from the city. I was born and raised in the countryside, the daughter of simple farmers who barely had enough to eat. But to Mrs. Genevieve, I was too sophisticated for her son, while simultaneously not refined enough for her family. A contradiction I could never resolve. Anthony traveled a lot for work. He would spend entire weeks on the road selling farming equipment to farmers in other regions. At first, he called every day, sent affectionate letters, and returned with small gifts for me. But gradually, the calls decreased. The letters became shorter, the gifts rarer. Later, I discovered that Mrs. Genevieve had convinced Anthony that calling home too often was a waste of money. She also forgot to tell me when he called during the day while I was busy with chores, and the letters, many of them, simply disappeared before reaching my hands. "Anthony needs to focus on his work," she would say when I complained about the lack of news. "Men don't like clingy women." And so went the first years of my marriage, a constant struggle to maintain my place in that house, in that family, and especially in my husband's heart, who increasingly grew distant, manipulated by his mother's poisonous words. When we completed 3 years of marriage, the pressure for a grandchild began. Every month when my period came, Mrs. Genevieve would look at me with contempt, as if I were failing on purpose. In my time, a woman who didn't give her husband children was considered cursed, she would comment during dinner, making the sign of the cross. "Thank God, today we have doctors who can check what's wrong." The truth is, Anthony spent more time on the road than at home. How could I get pregnant if we barely saw each other? But of course, I couldn't say that. A good wife doesn't question her husband's absences. It was during this time that I noticed the pitying looks neighbors gave me, conversations that stopped when I approached at the market or church. Later, I discovered that Mrs. Genevieve was spreading rumors about me in town. She said I was barren, that I had female problems, that Anthony was unhappy in the marriage. "Poor son of mine," she would tell the other women. "Married to a girl who cannot continue our family line." And so, slowly, she undermined my reputation, my confidence, my marriage, all with a smile on her lips and a Bible in her hands. The situation worsened when Ellie arrived. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were returning from church when a car stopped in front of our house. A beautiful young woman with dark hair and green eyes stepped out, carrying a small suitcase. It was Ellie, the daughter of Mrs. Genevieve's best friend. "My father remarried," she explained through tears as my mother-in-law embraced her with a tenderness she had never shown me. "His new wife doesn't want me in the house. I have nowhere to go." "Stay with us as long as you need, dear," said Mrs. Genevieve, without even consulting me. It was her house, after all. I was just the son's wife, a guest who could be replaced at any moment. Ellie wasn't a bad person, I must acknowledge. She was just a lost young woman who found herself in the middle of a cruel game orchestrated by my mother-in-law. She occupied spaces that should have been mine without realizing, or pretending not to realize, the discomfort she caused. She used my kitchen utensils without asking, left her things scattered around the house, and worst of all, received from Mrs. Genevieve all the affection and attention that were denied to me. "Look how Ellie set the table," my mother-in-law would say during meals. "What care, what elegance. She seems like she was born in a palace." Gradually, I began to notice how Ellie always appeared when Anthony called. She would stay nearby, letting out little giggles that made my husband ask, "Who's there with you?" And Mrs. Genevieve made a point of answering, "It's Ellie, that girl I told you about. She's helping us so much here at home." When Anthony's letters arrived, Mrs. Genevieve and Ellie would read them together before even giving them to me. If I asked why, the answer was always the same. "We need to see if there's any important information about the business, any return date we need to prepare for." It went on like this for months, living in that suffocating environment, feeling that gradually I was being erased, replaced. Anthony, who used to be gone for weeks, now stayed away for entire months without coming home. "He's making good money on this trip," Mrs. Genevieve would say. "Don't be selfish wanting him to come back just because you miss him." One night late, I heard voices coming from my mother-in-law's room. I silently approached the partially open door and could see Mrs. Genevieve and Ellie talking in low voices. "It's just a matter of time now," my mother-in-law was saying. "You'll stay here afterward, won't you? I need someone to take care of me, and you're like the daughter I never had." Ellie smiled, looking more uncomfortable than satisfied. "You've been very good to me, Mrs. Genevieve. I don't know what would have become of me without your help. Don't worry, dear. Soon everything will be resolved. Anthony deserves a real wife, someone like you." I froze hearing those words. What exactly was my mother-in-law planning? Was it just another of her manipulations to humiliate me, or something worse? I didn't know. But that night, something told me the danger was real, that I should flee from that house while I could. But where would I go? I had no close family, no money of my own. And despite everything, I still loved Anthony. I believed that when he returned, when we were together again, I could make him see the truth about his mother. Little did I know that in a few days I would be fighting for my life, buried in a coffin, tearing off my nails on the wood, while Mrs. Genevieve wrote to my husband, telling him about my tragic and sudden death. This part of my story still gives me nightmares, but I need to tell it, because what happened afterward changed my life forever and could change yours too if you're going through something similar. Remember to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the continuation of this story, and share it with those you think need to hear it. Sometimes, a story like this can save a life. Many ask me how I survived that fateful Sunday. How a 23-year-old woman found the strength to escape from a coffin buried 6 feet deep. The answer is simple. When you're fighting for your life, you discover a strength you never knew existed. That Sunday in June 1961 began like any other. The sky was clear, birds were singing in the apple trees in the yard, and I woke up with renewed hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the day Anthony finally returned home. It had been almost 2 months since his last visit. Mrs. Genevieve was strangely good-humored that morning. Usually, she barely spoke to me on Sundays, preferring to focus on preparations for church. But that day she smiled when I entered the kitchen. "Good morning, my dear," she said, stirring something on the wood stove. "I made a special coffee today. I have a good feeling." Mrs. Genevieve's good feelings always gave me chills. They usually meant bad news for me, but I tried to smile, pretending everything was normal. "We'll make a special lunch today," she continued. "Ellie will help us. The poor thing has such skillful hands for cooking." I spent the morning helping with preparations, always under my mother-in-law's watchful eye. She was different, agitated, almost anxious. Her eyes shone in a way I had never seen before. Ellie also seemed different that day. She wore a light blue dress that I immediately recognized. It was similar to my favorite dress, the one Anthony praised so much, but hers seemed new, more elegant. She was particularly quiet, avoiding looking me in the eyes. Around noon, Mrs. Genevieve called us to the table. Lunch was served. Roast chicken with potatoes, rice, beans, and a green salad. Everything impeccably prepared, as if we were expecting important visitors. Sit down," she said, indicating the places. She had set the table with the fine china that we rarely used. "Today is a special day." "Are we celebrating something, Mrs. Genevieve?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "In a way," she replied with an enigmatic smile. "Let's just say I'm anticipating positive changes." Ellie lowered her eyes to her plate, moving the food around without really eating. She looked uncomfortable, as if she knew something I didn't. The meal proceeded in a strange silence, broken only by Mrs. Genevieve's occasional comments about the weather, the neighborhood, Anthony's latest letter, a letter I had never seen. When we finished eating, Mrs. Genevieve rose abruptly. "I almost forgot. I prepared a special tea for you, Clara." She went to the stove and returned with a steaming cup, placing it in front of me. The liquid had a dark, almost purple color, and a strong, bitter aroma. "It's an old recipe," she said, with that strange gleam in her eyes. "It helps women get pregnant. Isn't that what you want? To give Anthony a child?" I looked at the cup with suspicion. In 3 years of living together, Mrs. Genevieve had never shown any genuine concern for my well-being. Why now, suddenly, was she interested in helping me get pregnant? "Is it so bitter?" I asked, noticing the strong smell. "All the best medicines are bitter, my dear," she replied, watching me carefully. "Drink it while it's hot. It works better that way." Ellie finally spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "Who knows? Maybe it works. It would be wonderful to have a baby in the house." But there was something in her eyes, fear, guilt, that contradicted the enthusiasm of her words. I brought the cup to my lips, hesitant. The liquid tasted even worse than it smelled. Bitter, with a metallic touch that burned my tongue. I involuntarily made a face. "Drink it all," insisted Mrs. Genevieve, her eyes fixed on me. "It won't work if you don't drink to the last drop." Under her relentless gaze, I forced myself to swallow the entire contents of the cup. The taste was horrible, but what could happen? At worst, it would just be another of Mrs. Genevieve's useless miracle cures. It didn't take long to realize something was wrong. About half an hour after lunch, I started feeling a slight dizziness that quickly intensified. My legs became wobbly, and I had to lean against the walls to walk to my room. "I'm not feeling well," I mumbled to Ellie, who found me in the hallway. "I think I'll lie down for a bit." "It's normal," she replied without looking me in the eyes. "Mrs. Genevieve said the tea might cause drowsiness. It's part of the process." I managed to reach my room, where I collapsed on the bed. The dizziness was now accompanied by nausea and a strange tingling sensation in my limbs. I tried to get up to ask for help, but my body wouldn't respond to my brain's commands. Something is wrong, I thought, feeling the panic grow. That wasn't a fertility remedy. With superhuman effort, I dragged myself to the door. I needed to get out of there, to seek help. But as soon as I managed to open it, the world spun violently around me. The last thing I remember was falling in the hallway, hearing hurried footsteps approaching. And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, the first sensation was suffocation, I couldn't move. I was confined in a tight, dark space, smelling of earth and wood. My eyes opened to total darkness. I instinctively stretched my arms, and my fingers touched rough wood just inches from my face. I felt around me, sensing more wood on all sides. It was when the terrible reality hit me like lightning. I was in a coffin, buried. "No, no, no," I screamed, but my voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the wood and earth. "Help! Someone help me!" Panic took over. I began thrashing violently, punching and kicking the coffin with all the strength I had, screaming until my throat burned. Tears streamed down my face as I fought uselessly against the wooden prison. "Please, God, I don't want to die like this." But nobody answered. There was only silence, a silence so deep I could hear my racing heart and my labored breathing. The air was already getting heavy, difficult to breathe. How much time did I have? How much oxygen remained in that tiny space? That's when I realized, if I continued to panic, I would consume what little oxygen I had much faster. I needed to calm down, to think. I forced myself to breathe more slowly, even with my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. "Think, Clara, think," I repeated to myself. "There must be a way out." I began to methodically feel every inch of the coffin, looking for some weakness, some flaw I could exploit. The wood seemed fragile in some spots, perhaps rotted by humidity. Mrs. Genevieve probably used some old coffin that had been stored in the barn. Time passed, or was it minutes, hours? I completely lost track in the suffocating darkness. The air became increasingly heavy, and my thoughts began to get confused. Images of Anthony, of our house, of a life that now seemed so distant, mixed with visions of my mother-in-law's satisfied face. Breathing became more difficult. My chest burned as if it were on fire. Desperation returned with full force, and I began frantically scratching at the wood above my head, not caring about my breaking nails, my bleeding fingers. It was at this moment, when my strength was almost gone, that I felt something slightly give way under my fingers. A part of the wood seemed more fragile, started to creak under the pressure. I gathered what little strength I had left and pushed with all the determination I could muster. The wood creaked, resisted, but finally gave way, creating a small opening. And then the horror. Earth began to fall on my face, entering my mouth, my eyes, my ears. The panic returned even stronger. I could suffocate with the earth before even managing to get out. I fought to stay calm while trying to widen the opening, protecting my face with one hand while digging with the other. More earth fell. It was becoming impossible to breathe. My lungs burned, begging for air. "I'm going to die here," I thought, feeling the weight of the earth on my body, the darkness swallowing my consciousness again. I don't know where the strength came from. Maybe it was the survival instinct, maybe the anger for everything they had done to me, or maybe simply the refusal to give Mrs. Genevieve the satisfaction of seeing me dead. But I continued digging, inch by inch, through the cold, damp earth. My fingers no longer had nails. Blood ran down my wrists, mixing with the soil. Every movement was agony, but I continued. I won't die here. I won't give her that pleasure. I don't know how long I stayed like this, desperately digging toward the surface. It could have been minutes or hours. Time loses all meaning when you're fighting for your life. Finally, when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when my lungs seemed about to explode and my consciousness began to fade, I felt something different. Fresher air touched my bloodied fingers. I redoubled my efforts, digging with renewed desperation. After a few more minutes of agony, my hand emerged on the surface. I felt the night air, fresh and pure as I had never felt before. With one last effort, I pushed my body upward, emerging from the ground like a ghost, covered in earth, blood, and sweat. I fell exhausted onto the damp grass, breathing in great gulps, crying and trembling uncontrollably. I looked around and recognized the back of the property, a small improvised cemetery where Mrs. Genevieve buried the farm animals, and now had tried to bury me too. The faint light of a waning moon illuminated the macabre scene, the disturbed earth from where I had emerged, my destroyed hands, my body covered in dirt and blood. It seemed like a scene out of a nightmare, but it was real. Terribly real. After a few minutes recovering my strength, I tried to stand up. My legs barely supported me, but the fear of being discovered by Mrs. Genevieve gave me the energy to continue. I stumbled toward the house, guided by the light coming from the kitchen. As I approached, I saw something through the window that I will never forget. Mrs. Genevieve, sitting at the table, calmly writing a letter. Even from a distance, I could hear her voice as she read aloud what she was writing. "Dear Anthony, it is with deep regret that I inform you that your wife has left us. The doctor said it was her heart. Don't worry about the funeral. I've already taken care of everything to spare you that pain. Ellie has been my guardian angel during this difficult time." That woman, who should have been like a second mother to me, was calmly communicating my death to my husband, a death that she herself had tried to cause. And worse, she was already preparing my replacement. At that moment, I knew I couldn't go back to that house. If Mrs. Genevieve saw me, she would try to finish what she started. I needed to flee, seek help, survive. With the last strength I had left, I dragged myself to the road that led to the neighboring farm. The Rogers house was about half a mile away. It seemed an impossible journey in my condition, but I had no choice. With each step, I felt I could faint. My entire body ached, my hands were bleeding intensely, and the effects of the poison still coursed through my veins. But I continued, one foot in front of the other, driven by the will to live, to denounce what they had done to me, to have justice. How long did it take me to travel that half mile? An hour? 2? All I know is that when I finally spotted the lights of the Rogers farm, my legs gave way. I fell at the entrance to the property, and my last thought before losing consciousness was, "Please let someone find me." And someone did. And what happened next changed the course of my life forever. I woke up 3 days after my desperate escape. I opened my eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling, confused and disoriented. For a terrible moment, I thought I was still in the coffin, and panic began to take over. I tried to get up, but a sharp pain in my hands made me moan. "Easy, young lady. Everything's all right now. You're safe." It was Mrs. Louise, wife of James Rogers, our neighbors from the farm next door. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, calming me. I looked at my hands and saw they were completely bandaged. Fragmented memories began to return, the bitter tea, the darkness, the earth falling on my face, the desperate struggle to escape. How did you find me?" I asked. My voice was almost unrecognizable, hoarse from screaming in the coffin. "Our dog Rusty. He started barking like crazy near the farm entrance. James went to check and found you fallen on the road, covered in earth and blood. For a moment, he thought you were a ghost." Over the following days, I slowly regained my strength. Dr. Peterson, the town doctor who attended to rural families in the region, came daily to check on my condition. He confirmed what I already suspected. I had been poisoned with a mixture of toxic herbs, probably belladonna and other plants that Mrs. Genevieve cultivated in her medicinal garden. "It's a miracle you survived," he told me one afternoon, changing the bandages on my hands. "Not just the poison, but the hours buried alive. Your body is young and strong, but it was your will to live that really saved you." The news of what had happened spread quickly through the community. Sheriff Thompson came to question me as soon as he learned I was conscious. A serious man with a thick mustache and penetrating gaze, he listened attentively to my account, taking notes in a worn little notebook. "And you're absolutely certain it was your mother-in-law who poisoned you?" he asked, studying me over his glasses. "I am, Sheriff. She herself prepared the tea and insisted I drink to the last drop. And the girl, this Ellie, was involved too." I hesitated. Despite everything, I wasn't sure if Ellie really knew what Mrs. Genevieve was planning. "I can't say for certain. She was there, but she seemed nervous, uncomfortable. Maybe she didn't know exactly what was going to happen. The sheriff nodded, closing his notebook. Well, unfortunately, when we arrived at the property, your mother-in-law and the girl had already left. They took clothes, documents, and some money from what we could tell, but we found this. He took a small, black-covered notebook from his pocket and placed it in my hands. It was Mrs. Genevieve's diary. Read it when you feel strong enough. It confirms everything you told us, and more. That night, alone in the room the Rogers had prepared for me, I opened the diary. The pages were filled with my mother-in-law's small, precise handwriting. I began to read, feeling a chill down my spine with each sentence. The plan was there, detailed like an architectural project. How she had gradually distanced me from Anthony through small manipulations. How she had prolonged his trips so I would feel increasingly isolated. How she had spread rumors in town to undermine my reputation. And then Ellie's arrival, not by chance, but meticulously planned. The young woman had no problems with her father or stepmother. It was all a lie orchestrated by Mrs. Genevieve, who had chosen her as the ideal replacement for me long before bringing her to our house. Most shocking, however, was discovering that Anthony wasn't entirely innocent. In the diary pages, Mrs. Genevieve mentioned several conversations with her son about me, about how I wasn't the ideal wife for him, how I would never adapt to country life, how I would probably never give him a child. In one particularly painful entry, she wrote, "Anthony is finally beginning to see reason. Today he asked if I really thought he and Clara had a future together. I planted the seed of doubt, and now it begins to bloom." I closed the diary feeling betrayed twice, not just by my mother-in-law, who had tried to kill me, but also by my husband, who had allowed her to poison his mind against me, who perhaps even knew about the plan. A week after being found, I could already walk around the Rogers house without help. My hands still hurt terribly. The fingers without nails were extremely sensitive, but at least the fever caused by the poison had ceased. That's when James rushed into the kitchen, where I was having coffee with Mrs. Louise. "Anthony's back," he said, looking at me with concern. "He's in town, looking for you." My heart raced. Part of me still loved that man, despite everything. But the revelation in the diary had planted a doubt that grew each day. How much did he know? How much had he consented to? "I don't want to see him," I answered, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. "He'll come here," said James. "He's already asking around. Someone will certainly tell him you're with us." Mrs. Louise took my hand carefully. "Clara, dear, you don't have to see him if you don't want to. We can say you're still too weak, that the doctor prohibited visits." I slowly shook my head. "No, I need to face him. I need to look him in the eyes and hear what he has to say." The following afternoon, I heard the sound of a car approaching. From the bedroom window, I saw Anthony get out of a black Ford, the same one he used on his work trips. He looked haggard, with deep circles under his eyes and a thinner face than I remembered. I slowly descended the stairs, leaning on the railing. When I entered the living room, Anthony was standing, holding his hat in his hands, talking quietly with James. When he saw me, his face paled even more. "Clara, my God, it's true." "Mother?" He couldn't even finish the sentence, as if the words were poison in his mouth. "Yes, Anthony, your mother poisoned me and buried me alive," I replied, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. He fell to his knees in front of me, crying like a child. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. The letters Mother sent me said you were fine, that you were excited about meeting me in the next town on my route." I stood looking at him, feeling a strange detachment, as if observing the scene from very far away. This man, who was once the center of my world, now seemed like a stranger to me, weak, manipulable, unable to protect even the woman he swore to love. "I won't go back to that house, Anthony," I said simply. "But Clara, it's our home. We'll start over, just the two of us. Mother will never come near us again. I promise. I'll take care of you, protect you." That's when I realized He still didn't understand what had happened, the gravity of what his mother had done. "Where is your mother now, Anthony?" He hesitated, avoiding my gaze. "The police are looking for her. They say she fled to Canada, maybe." "And what do you think she did? Do you really believe your mother tried to kill me?" He lowered his eyes, and in that moment, I saw the truth. "Clara, you need to understand. Mother has always been a difficult woman, but deep down she only wants what's best for me. Maybe she went too far this time." I felt a cold anger spread through my body. "Too far? She buried me alive, Anthony. I tore off my nails trying to get out of that coffin. I felt the earth falling on my face, suffocating me. I know. It's horrible, but Mother wasn't in her right mind. She always had this obsession with controlling my life, with ensuring I had the best. In her head, maybe she really believed she was doing you a favor by getting rid of me," I completed, incredulous. He didn't answer, but his silence said everything. "Your mother only wanted the best for you," I repeated his words, feeling each one like a stab. "And the best for you was to see me dead." "That's not what I meant. Clara, please, you're twisting my words." It was at that moment I realized, looking at that man I had loved, I clearly saw how he would always be, a boy tied to his mother's apron strings, unable to see the truth, even when it was bleeding right in front of him. As much as he swore to protect me now, his loyalty would always be divided. "Anthony," I said calmly, "if your mother appeared at that door right now, crying, saying she was sorry, what would you do?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. "You would forgive her," I stated, "just as you always forgave her for every small cruelty against me. You would bring her back into our lives, believing she had changed, that she had learned her lesson. It's not fair to put me in this position, Clara. She is my mother, and I am your wife, the wife your mother tried to kill." I stood up with difficulty, showing him my bandaged hands. "I can't be part of this anymore, Anthony. I can't live fearing what your mother will do next, or worse, fearing the day you decide she's right about me." "What are you saying? You're going to leave me?" His voice mixed desperation and indignation, as if I were committing some injustice against him. "I'm saying I've already survived one burial. I won't wait for the next one." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Anthony refused to accept my decision, appearing almost daily at the Rogers house with gifts, promises, pleas. He even brought the parish priest to try to convince me to save our marriage. "Marriage is sacred, my child," said Father Wilson, sitting uncomfortably in the Rogers living room. "For better or worse, in sickness and in health." "And do you believe being buried alive by your mother-in-law is part of those vows, Father?" I asked, with a calmness that surprised even me. He didn't know how to respond. Meanwhile, Dr. Eong, Richard Peterson, the doctor who was caring for me, began visiting more frequently than necessary. A kind man in his 40s, a widower who had studied medicine in Boston before returning to our small town. He brought me books, talked with me about subjects that went beyond weather and harvests, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts. It was he who gave me the idea that would change my life. "Have you ever thought about studying nursing, Clara?" he asked one afternoon while changing my bandages. "You have delicate hands and an incredible capacity to endure pain. You would make an excellent nurse." I laughed, finding the idea absurd. "I barely finished junior high, doctor. How could I be a nurse?" "There are technical courses in the city. It's not as difficult as you imagine. And if I may say, you need to rebuild your life away from here. This town has too many painful memories for you." That seed planted by Dr. Peterson began to germinate in my mind. I really needed a fresh start, away from there, away from Anthony and the memories of Mrs. Genevieve. But how? I had no money of my own, no family to turn to. As if reading my thoughts, Dr. Peterson continued, "I have a sister who lives in the city. She runs a small clinic and always needs assistance. If you want, I can talk to her." It would be a start until you can enter a formal course. I looked at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. Why are you helping me so much, doctor? He smiled with an expression I couldn't decipher at the time. Let's just say I also know what it's like to need a fresh start. The following week, I received a telegram from Dr. Peterson's sister, offering me a room in her house and a job as an assistant at the clinic. It was as if a door had opened after months of darkness. Anthony was furious when he learned of my plans. You can't just leave. We're married before God. Your God, apparently, allows mothers-in-law to bury daughters-in-law alive, I replied, surprised by my own firmness. I'm leaving, Anthony. I've made my decision. And if I don't allow it, I'm your husband. I have rights. What rights? To hand me over to your mother to finish the job, or do you plan to do it yourself next time? He recoiled, shocked by my words. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of me, of the woman who had emerged from that coffin, a woman who had nothing left to lose. You've changed, Clara, he finally said. You're not the same. I smiled, feeling a strange peace invade me. You're right, Anthony. I died in that coffin. The woman you knew, the one who endured everything silently, who accepted your mother's humiliations, who always tried to please you. She doesn't exist anymore. She was buried in your backyard along with my illusions. 2 weeks later, I boarded the train to the city, carrying only a small suitcase with clothes borrowed from Mrs. Louise and an uncertain future ahead. I was 23 years old and starting from scratch. Anthony came to the station in one last desperate attempt to convince me to stay. He brought flowers, tears, promises. But when the train started to move, I felt only relief. Through the window, I watched his figure diminishing on the platform until he became just a distant point on the horizon of my past. I didn't know then that fate still had one last meeting in store for us, years later. A meeting that would confirm that my decision that day at the station had been the most correct of my life. I arrived in the city in July 1961, with little more than the clothes on my back and hands still in the healing process. The train station was a human anthill, hurried people in all directions, street vendors, the deafening noise of trains arriving and departing. For a country girl like me, it was both frightening and fascinating. Karen, Dr. Peterson's sister, was waiting for me on the platform with an improvised sign with my name. She was a woman in her mid-40s, gray hair tied in a severe bun, but with kind eyes that resembled her brother's. She hugged me as if we were old acquaintances. Richard told me your story, she said, as she guided me out of the station. Not in detail, of course. He just said you needed a fresh start. And who am I to judge? We all deserve a second chance. Karen's apartment was about 20 minutes from the station, in a modest but clean neighborhood. It was small, a living room, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, and bathroom, decorated simply but cozy. On the living room wall, a framed diploma caught my attention. School of Nursing, St. Catherine. You're a nurse? I asked, surprised. Head nurse, she replied proudly. I've been working at St. Mary's Hospital for almost 20 years. The clinic I mentioned is actually a community health center I helped found in the neighborhood. It operates on weekends and serves people who can't afford medical treatment. That night, lying in the small bed in the guest room, I cried silently. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief. For the first time in years, I didn't need to sleep with one eye open, fearing what Mrs. Genevieve might do. I was hundreds of miles away from her, surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to help me. The first days in the city were a whirlwind of new experiences. Karen taught me how to navigate public transportation, find the best places to buy fresh food at affordable prices, the parks where we could walk on Sundays. She didn't ask many questions about my past, and I was grateful for that. At the community health center, I started performing simple tasks, organizing patient files, keeping the waiting room in order, helping the elderly fill out forms. My hands weren't completely recovered yet, which limited what I could do physically, but I carefully observed the nurses' work, amazed by their competence and compassion. "You have the eyes of someone who wants to learn," commented Dr. Paul, one of the volunteer doctors, after catching me watching as he sutured the arm of a construction worker. "Have you ever thought about studying nursing?" I told him about Dr. Peterson's suggestion. "But I don't know if I could. I don't have money for a course, and my formal education is limited." "There are scholarship programs for people in your situation," he replied. "And as for formal education, well, that can be resolved with study and determination. You seem to have both." That's how, 3 months after my arrival in the city, I began attending night classes to complete my basic education. During the day, I continued working at the health center, now with more responsibilities as my hands strengthened. At night, after classes, I studied until falling asleep over my books. It was a period of enormous challenges. Money was tight. The little I earned at the center barely covered my basic expenses for transportation and school materials. Karen insisted that I didn't need to pay rent, but I made a point of contributing what I could to household expenses. There were nights when fatigue seemed unbearable, nights when I dreamed of the coffin, waking up drenched in sweat, fighting to breathe, nights when the longing for a life I never had, a loving family, a husband who truly protected me, hurt like an open wound. But I persisted. Each small achievement, a good grade on a test, a sincere thank you from a patient, a compliment from Karen, was like a ray of sunshine after an endless storm. In 1962, almost a year after my arrival in the city, I received a letter that shook my fragile equilibrium. It was from Mrs. Louise, the neighbor who had taken me in after my desperate escape from Mrs. Genevieve's house. "Dear Clara," she wrote in her trembling handwriting, "I hope this letter finds you well. I have news you need to know. Your mother-in-law was finally located and arrested in a town in Canada. She was living under a false name, but was recognized by a traveling American businessman who remembered the case from the newspapers. Anthony sold almost everything he had to hire lawyers for her. He's determined to prove she wasn't in her right mind when she did what she did. As for Ellie, it seems she returned to her father's house. She testified to the police that she didn't know about Mrs. Genevieve's plan, that she believed you had run off with another man, as your mother-in-law had said. Whether it's true or not, only God knows." I let the letter fall to the floor, feeling suddenly exhausted. After everything his mother had done, Anthony was still by her side, defending her, spending everything he had to free her from justice. I had made the right decision in leaving. "Bad news?" asked Karen, finding me still sitting, staring into space. I handed her the letter in silence. She read it quickly, her eyes widening with each line. "My God, Clara," she said finally. "Richard told me you had been through something terrible, but this is monstrous." It was the first time I told the whole story to someone other than Dr. Peterson and the authorities. Karen listened in silence, her kind eyes filling with tears as I described the years of small cruelties, Ellie's arrival, the poisoned tea, the hours of absolute terror in the coffin. When I finished, she simply hugged me. She didn't say everything would be fine. She didn't offer empty advice or easy consolation. She just held me while I cried, not from sadness or fear, but from relief at finally sharing the burden I carried. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't allow my past to define my future. Mrs. Genevieve had tried to bury me, but like a seed, I would sprout from the earth stronger. In 1963, I completed my basic education and, thanks to Dr. Paul's enthusiastic recommendation, got a scholarship for a nursing technical course. They were 2 intense years of study, internships in hospitals, sleepless nights preparing assignments, and reviewing subjects. It was during one of these internships that I met Robert. He was a resident doctor in the pediatrics department, a quiet man with gentle eyes and steady hands. I observed him for weeks before we really spoke. The way he treated children with respect, how he listened attentively to concerned parents, how he never lost patience, even after exhausting shifts. Our first real encounter happened during an emergency. A child in convulsions was brought in urgently, and I was the only assistant available at that moment. Robert gave me clear, precise instructions, and we worked in perfect sync to stabilize the young patient. "You have a knack for this," he said afterward, as we had coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "It's not something you learn from books." I smiled, flattered by the genuine compliment. "I've learned to trust my instincts. They've saved me more than once." We began meeting regularly after shifts, first to discuss cases, then for conversations that went far beyond medicine. I told him about my past bit by bit, testing his reactions, expecting to see the horror, the pity, or worse, the disbelief I had seen in Anthony's eyes. But Robert just listened. Really listened. When I finally told him about the coffin, about how I fought to get out of the earth with my own hands, he held my scarred hands and kissed them delicately. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he said simply. Our relationship progressed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and admiration. There were no power games, no subtle manipulations, no control attempts disguised as concern. It was the opposite of everything I had known with Anthony and his mother. In 1965, I graduated as a nursing technician and got a job at the same hospital where Robert worked. That same year, he proposed to me, not with grand gestures or grandiose promises, but with simple and sincere words during a picnic in the park. "I want to build a life with you, Clara," he said. "A life based on partnership, respect, and true love. I can't promise it will always be easy, but I promise I'll always be by your side, listening to you, supporting you, growing with you." I hesitated. Legally, I was still married to Anthony, though we hadn't had contact for years. And there was another, deeper concern. "What if I can't have children?" I asked, expressing a fear that had tormented me since the years with Mrs. Genevieve. "I was married for 3 years and never got pregnant. Your mother always said I was barren." Robert smiled, caressing my face. "First, if you can't have biological children, there are many children needing a home. Second, you were married to a man who was rarely home, so it doesn't seem like you had many opportunities. And third, even if your mother-in-law were a doctor, which she wasn't, she had no way of knowing this without proper exams. She was just being cruel." His words melted a layer of insecurity I didn't even know I still carried. I accepted his proposal with tears in my eyes, not of sadness, but of a happiness I never thought possible for me. I got the divorce from Anthony that same year. A difficult process at the time, but facilitated by the extraordinary circumstances of the case and the fact that he didn't contest it. According to the lawyer, he was completely absorbed in his mother's trial and barely had the resources to deal with another legal battle. Robert and I married in a simple ceremony, just with close friends. Karen was my matron of honor, radiant in the role of surrogate mother. Dr. Peterson came from my hometown, especially for the occasion, bringing with him a gift that deeply moved me, a letter from the Rogers, the couple who saved me that terrible night, wishing me all the happiness in the world. In the following years, we built our life together step by step. I continued studying, completing specialization courses in pediatric nursing. Robert advanced in his career, becoming a respected pediatrician. In 1967, we bought our first house, small, but ours. And that same year, I discovered I was pregnant. When I held my daughter Anne in my arms for the first time, I cried with joy and relief. All of Mrs. Genevieve's gloomy predictions about my supposed infertility proved to be just another of her cruel lies. In the following years, we had 2 more children, Michael in 1969 and Lisa in 1972. Life wasn't always perfect, of course. We had financial difficulties, discussions about how to raise the children, moments of exhaustion with the demands of demanding careers and a growing family. But even in the most difficult moments, I never doubted the solidity of our relationship, the security we had built together. It was in 1975, almost 15 years after my desperate escape, that I had the last encounter with my past. I was at the hospital working in the pediatrics department when I was called to assist in an emergency in the geriatric ward. A patient in critical condition needed immediate help. When I entered the room, my heart almost stopped. There, lying in the bed, connected to tubes and monitors, was Anthony. Older, thinner, almost unrecognizable, but definitely him. He didn't see me immediately. He was semi-conscious, debilitated by a severe heart attack. For a moment, I considered asking to be replaced, but something inside me knew I needed to face this moment. I did my job professionally, helping the doctor on duty stabilize him. When we finished, I stayed to check his vital signs one last time. That's when his eyes opened and focused on me. "Clara," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. "Is it really you? Or am I dreaming?" "It's me, Anthony," I replied calmly, adjusting the IV in his arm. You look so happy." There was a note of surprise in his voice that said a lot about how he expected to find me. "I am well, happy." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again, tears running down his temples. "Mother died in prison 2 years ago. She never regretted what she did until the end, said she only wanted what was best for me." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. "I lost everything trying to save her," he continued. "The farm, the job, everything. In the end, she was gone, and I was left with nothing but regrets." I adjusted the pillow under his head, an automatic gesture of professional care. "You were right, Clara," he said, holding my wrist with surprising strength. "About everything. I didn't deserve you. I never did." I gently removed his hand from my wrist. "It's not about deserving, Anthony. It never was. It was about choices. You made yours. I made mine. Do you forgive me?" There was a desperation in his eyes that reminded me of the young man I had fallen in love with so many years ago. I sighed, feeling not anger or resentment, but a kind of peace. "I forgave a long time ago, Anthony. Not for you, but for me. I couldn't carry that weight forever." When I left the room, I felt as if the last chain binding me to the past had finally broken. Anthony survived that heart attack, but we never saw each other again. I heard he moved to the coast years later, living modestly from fishing until his death in 1989. The story I've shared with you isn't just about survival. It's about rebirth, about emerging from the depths of the earth not just alive, but transformed. Often people ask me if I regret marrying Anthony, living with Mrs. Genevieve, all those years of silent suffering. The truth is, I don't. Each experience, even the most painful ones, shaped me into the woman I became. Today, at 87, I look back and see not just the horror of that coffin, but also the strength I discovered within myself as I fought to get out of it. I see the 3 wonderful children I raised, the 7 grandchildren who brighten my old age, the 40 years of happy marriage with Robert, until his passing 5 years ago. When I left the hospital that day after reuniting with Anthony, I felt as if a cycle had finally closed in my life. I had spent nearly 15 years carrying the weight of those memories, the bitter tea, the suffocating darkness of the coffin, the betrayal of those who should have protected me. Now, I could finally truly leave them behind. Robert noticed the change as soon as I got home. He was always sensitive to small alterations in my mood, in my gestures. It was one of those qualities that made me love him more and more over the years. "Did something happen today?" he asked, as we had dinner with the children already asleep. I told him about the reunion with Anthony, about his debilitated state, about his words of regret. I told him about Mrs. Genevieve's death in prison, without remorse until the end. "How do you feel?" he asked, holding my hand across the table. I reflected for a moment, seeking the most honest answer. "At peace," I said finally, as if a huge weight had been removed from my shoulders. Not because I know she's dead or he's suffering, but because I finally understood they no longer have power over me. They haven't for a long time. That sensation of liberation accompanied me in the years that followed, allowing me to fully live in the present without the constant shadows of the past. Our family grew and prospered. Anne, our firstborn, showed from an early age a sharp intelligence and an interest in books that would lead her years later to become a university professor. Michael, our middle child, inherited his father's compassion and also pursued a career in medicine, specializing in psychiatry, a choice I always believed was influenced by knowing my story from a young age. Our youngest, Lisa, surprised everyone by following a completely different path, becoming a visual artist, transforming emotions into colors and shapes on canvases. Robert and I continued working at the same hospital until 1985, when we decided to retire from formal clinical practice. He was then 60, I was 47. It wasn't exactly a complete retirement. We both remained involved in volunteer work and community projects. But it was time to slow down, to enjoy more of the life we had built with so much effort. We bought a larger house with a spacious garden where I grew roses of all colors. Robert finally had time to return to his old hobby of woodworking, building furniture for our children, and eventually for the grandchildren who began arriving in the 1990s. They were tranquil days, filled with small joys. The children's visits on Sundays, afternoons reading in the garden, the occasional trips we took around the country. It was during one of these trips in 1987 that I received the news that Anthony had passed away. We were visiting the Grand Canyon when a call from the county clerk in my hometown reached us at the hotel. Apparently, I was still listed as a relative on some old documents, and they couldn't locate any other family member. He died alone, the clerk informed me, in a small fisherman's house on the coast. The neighbors said he lived modestly, rarely received visitors. I thanked him for the information and hung up the phone, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. It wasn't exactly sadness. The Anthony I loved had disappeared decades ago. It was something closer to melancholy, perhaps a lament for everything that could have been different if he had made other choices. "Do you want to go to the funeral?" asked Robert, always respectful of my feelings regarding my past. I shook my head. No, that part of my life has been over for a long time. I hope he found some peace before the end. We continued our trip, and in the days that followed, I found myself reflecting not on Anthony, but on the young woman I had been, that 20-year-old girl who married full of hopes, who desperately tried to make a marriage destined for failure work, who fought tooth and nail to escape from a coffin buried 6 feet deep. I realized I felt an immense pride in that young woman, in her resilience, in her refusal to give up, even when everything seemed lost. She was part of me, of course, but sometimes she seemed like a completely different person, someone I knew and admired, not just someone I had been. The 1990s brought significant changes for our family. The children were all established in their careers, 2 of them already married with small children. Robert and I became grandparents, a role we embraced with all enthusiasm. Our house became the family meeting point on weekends, with children running through the garden, the smell of cakes in the oven, and long conversations around the table. It was during this time that I began telling my story to the older grandchildren. Not all the dark details, of course, but enough for them to understand the importance of resilience, true love, the ability to start over even after the worst experiences. "Grandma was once inside a coffin and managed to get out," I would tell them, as they listened with wide eyes. That's why I always say we shouldn't give up when things get tough. In 1995, I was invited to give a lecture to nursing students about my professional experience. It was supposed to be a presentation about humanized care techniques for traumatized patients based on my years of clinical practice. But during the question session, a young student raised her hand. "Excuse the indiscretion, Mrs. Thompson, but is it true what they say, that you were buried alive when you were young?" A tense silence fell over the auditorium. The professor who had invited me looked mortified by the question, but I made a reassuring gesture to her. "It's true," I replied calmly. "It was many years ago, in circumstances that aren't appropriate to discuss here, but yes, I survived that." "And how? How did you manage to move forward after something like that?" The student's voice trembled slightly. I looked at that sea of young faces, all waiting for my answer. I realized that perhaps my story could have value beyond my own personal memories. It wasn't easy, I replied honestly. There were days when I woke up screaming, feeling the weight of the earth on my body. There were moments when distrust and fear threatened to consume everything good I was trying to build. But I discovered three fundamental things. First, that we are much stronger than we imagine. Second, that true love exists and heals. And third, that our worst experiences can transform into our greatest strength. After that lecture, more invitations came from other colleges, from support groups for victims of violence, even from a local radio program focused on stories of overcoming. Initially hesitant, I ended up accepting some of them, feeling that perhaps my experience could help other people. In 1998, my story was included in a book about survivors of extreme situations. The author, a psychologist specializing in trauma, interviewed me extensively over several months. It was a difficult process to relive every detail of those painful years, but also cathartic in a way I hadn't expected. "Your story is extraordinary," he said upon concluding our sessions. "Not just for the physical survival in that coffin, but for the emotional journey that came afterward. The reconstruction of a full life, the ability to love again, to trust, to find purpose." "I don't feel extraordinary," I replied sincerely. "I did what anyone would do in my situation. I fought to survive. Then I tried to be happy, day after day, choice after choice." "That's exactly what makes you extraordinary," he smiled. "That simplicity with which you face something so monumental." The book was published the following year and, to my surprise, had considerable repercussions. I received letters from strangers all over the country, mainly women who had survived their own metaphorical coffins, abusive relationships, toxic families, traumas of various types. "Your story gave me the courage to finally leave home," wrote a young mother from Miami. "If you managed to escape from a real coffin, I can escape from my marriage, which has been a prison for 10 years. Those letters moved me deeply. I responded to each one personally, offering words of encouragement and, when possible, information about support resources in their regions. Robert joked that I had become a correspondence counselor in my retirement years. The turn of the millennium brought new challenges. Robert was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2001, devastating news for our family. The disease progressed slowly at first, allowing us to maintain many of our usual activities. But as the years passed, the symptoms intensified, requiring constant adaptations to our routine. "It's my turn to take care of you now," I told him, adapting our house to his new needs, learning about medications and therapies, becoming his caregiver, just as he had been my support for so many years. They were difficult years, seeing that strong and vibrant man gradually losing control over his own body. But amid the difficulties, we found moments of deep connection and even unexpected joy. The visits from children and grandchildren became even more important, bringing life and movement to our house, increasingly adapted to Robert's limitations. In 2010, we celebrated 45 years of marriage with a small party in the garden. Robert was in a wheelchair by then, and his tremors had worsened considerably. But his eyes, those same gentle eyes that captivated me decades ago in the hospital, still shone when he looked at me. "Was it worth it?" he asked that night, when we were finally alone. "All these years with me?" "Every minute," I replied without hesitation, holding his trembling hands. "Every moment was a gift I almost didn't have. Remember what you told me when you proposed? That you promised to always be by my side, listening, supporting, growing with me? You fulfilled every word of that promise, Robert. How could it not be worth it?" He passed away peacefully in 2015 in our home, surrounded by the family we had built together. The pain of the loss was immense, a void that seemed impossible to fill, but there was also a deep gratitude for the 50 years we shared. 50 years that almost didn't exist, that would have been erased from history if I hadn't found the strength to dig my way out of that coffin in 1961. The following years brought a new phase of life, that of a great-grandmother. My grandchildren began having their own children, bringing a new generation to our family. They are children who know my story as a kind of family legend passed down by parents and uncles. Great-Grandma Clara is a hero, I once heard one of them say, filling my heart with a strange mix of emotion and embarrassment. I don't consider myself a hero. Never did. I'm just a woman who refused to die when it was easier to give up, who chose to trust again when it would have been safer to close off, who decided to transform a devastating experience into fuel for a meaningful life. Today, at 87, sitting in this chair in front of the camera, sharing my story with you, I feel that somehow I've completed a circle. That young woman buried alive 64 years ago could never have imagined that one day her story would be heard by so many people, that her words could bring comfort and inspiration to strangers. If I could go back in time and whisper something in the ear of that desperate young woman scratching wood in the darkness, I would say, "Keep digging, my girl. There's a wonderful life waiting for you on the other side of that earth. There's a man who will love you exactly as you deserve. There are children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who will only exist if you don't give up now. There are decades of small daily joys, of professional achievements, of moments of such intense beauty that they will make all this suffering seem like just a brief nightmare. Keep digging. Even if it hurts, even if it bleeds, it's worth it. Believe me, it's worth every second of pain." And that's what I say to you too who are watching now. If you're going through your own particular hell, if you feel buried alive under the weight of circumstances that seem impossible to overcome, keep digging. Use your nails if necessary, bleed if needed, but don't give up. On the other side of the earth that seems to suffocate you, there is fresh air, there is sunlight, there is a life you can't even imagine is possible right now. I know this because I lived it. I emerged from that coffin covered in earth and blood and eventually became this white-haired lady who smiles at you today with a heart full of memories of a full and meaningful life. There are no perfect, happy endings. Life is made of ups and downs, of joys and losses. I lost my beloved Robert, saw friends depart, faced my own battles with health in old age. But each day beyond that coffin was a gift, an opportunity, a victory against those who tried to bury not just my body, but my spirit. So, if there's a final message I'd like to leave, it's this. As long as there's breath, there's hope. As long as we can move a finger, we can change our reality. And sometimes, simply surviving is the most powerful form of resistance. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope something in it resonates with you. That somehow these words from an elderly lady can illuminate the path of someone going through their own darkness. Don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Who knows, it might reach exactly the person who needs to hear it today. With all my love.